One. Hey, young voters. Welcome back to another installment of Reform or Revolution. Today we'll be discussing chapters 3 and 4. So if you haven't seen any of the other videos, probably go watch the intro video and that'll explain everything you need to know. There will be a playlist link in the description. If you haven't read the chapters 3 and 4, probably read those because we want to make sure that you know what we're referencing and that you make up your own opinion, because we might just be wrong on everything we say. There's a fairly good chance that we're wrong on some of the things, definitely. So yeah, make sure to read it yourself so that you discern your own opinions before listening to ours, which might be wrong. Right, Sarah?
Probably will be wrong. It's very confusing chapters this week, so sorry in advance.
Yeah, but they were definitely good reads. I think chapter 4 starts getting into like the meat of her like points against reform. So I like that. But yeah. All right. Anything to add before we go into the chapter 3 breakdown?
Nope.
Oh, as always, leave your thoughts, because this is a read along, so you're reading and we're reading. Leave your thoughts in the comments and we'll reply to you. And if we find anything particularly interesting, we might include it in the next video, just talking about it before we start on with chapters 5 and 6. So make sure to leave a comment down below with your thoughts on these two chapters. And
yeah.
all right, let's go ahead and start. So chapter 3, she opens up with talking a lot about trade unions, right? And her main point is that unions can only take us so far, and they're sort of an arm of the capitalist system. She kind of deliberates on that throughout this chapter. Sarah, would you say that's probably accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so she starts off, she talks about how unions can't actually have the power to implement socialism because they can only dictate wages, and if you have wages then you don't have socialism, really, depending on your definition of socialism. So I mean, would you say that's a valuable criticism, Sarah? Or
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. This chapter is really confusing for me. I don't even remember her talking about that, to be honest.
I personally, I would say, if your goal was to establish socialism, unions are still the way through, because unions can be a gateway towards socialism, because you got to have some sort of like base of organization. If you have to do a revolution, then you have to have people on board with that revolution, a set program with that revolution, like a general proletariat who's class conscious. And the easiest way to do that is through community organizing in unions. So it's a bit strange to hear her criticizing the unions, but from her perspective, it does make sense to me, I guess. I just don't agree with her base framing of the whole thing. So she talks about, more specifically, her criticisms being that late stage, well, hold on. Under capitalist society, the labor market is detached from the general market, in the sense that what you're being paid in your wages isn't actually tied to what you're producing, like as a value. Because if you were paid what like you produced in value, then the company would make $0, because they're the one who's doing the work as a worker. So obviously they can't pay you the full value. So the value of products is sort of not really connected to how much money companies are spending on labor, until obviously the point where they're spending so much on labor that they have to up the prices of the products to maintain a profit margin. But basically she's saying unions are limited in what they can actually affect societally outside of dictating wages and worker benefits. So what would be your perspective on that, Sarah?
Um, I don't know, because I kind of agree with her, but I also kind of agree with Bernstein. like, I don't know, like you said in the beginning, and how trade unions are kind of the way to organize, and even if it is revolution, that's the way to go. Trade unions are the best way to get people together. But I don't think that Rosa was in a trade union. I don't think that's how she revolted when it ended up being around it. So I don't think you like need trade unions to do that. I don't know.
So you would agree with her then in that sense that trade unions can't
Yeah.
really get you to revolution if that's your
I
end
mean,
goal?
they can, but I don't know if it's like the only way.
Okay. Interesting. I guess what I would say about it would be unions are like they can affect things. If you have a better pay, you might have to work less hours. If you work less hours, you can spend more time living in the community and organizing. Unions can lead you to do more organizing. A lot of unions do like a lot of talks about I guess left-wing values and stuff like that, and they'll tell you who the unions will endorse certain candidates. So they play a stage in electoralism. All of this sort of may lead to a revolution if that would be the end goal. I guess those things could potentially lead to a revolution, although she maintains the position that they can't throughout the book. So I don't really fault her for not considering that because that's not within her frame of mind, I guess. And she just my fault with her is that she doesn't provide a whole lot of evidence before she makes her claims. So she kind of just expects you to accept what she's saying, which
Yeah.
makes it difficult for people who don't subscribe to her ideas to read the book and understand it. And even for people if you don't subscribe to her ideas, it makes it more difficult. Maybe why I found it so difficult. Although I guess it's still possible to understand these ideas while not subscribing to them. It's just more difficult, and you have to be very politically involved and have been exposed to Marxist theory in the past. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to understand what she's saying or engage with it because you just have to make so many assumptions, I feel like.
Yeah. She's basically only speaking to people who feel the same way as her.
Mm-hmm. So the next thing is late stage capitalism will cause unions to lose power as labor is less in demand, and you have more innovation, increasing productivity, meaning there's more products out there and there's more supply and there's less demand for products. Therefore, there's less demand for labor to make the products. Therefore, there will be less people in jobs and there won't be as many unions. At face value, this kind of makes sense to me, but then also you have to consider capitalism is based off of the idea of infinite growth. Well, it's obviously not infinite because we have finite resources on our planet. We're not really hitting that ceiling yet. So it just means that there's more people and more products and more jobs than less jobs. Because obviously we have for like almost 350, 370 million people in the United States. And in that day and age is probably like 10 million. So, and obviously, yes, labor unions have gone down, like participation in them, but I don't think it's because there's less people with jobs. So I don't know.
What do you think the reason is for labor unions going down?
Hmm?
What do you think the reason is for there being less labor unions then?
I mean, that's a pretty complicated concept, but I would say lack of class consciousness in the United States because of things like the Red Scare definitely were large contributors.
That makes sense.
Um, yeah, but I mean, I guess she did. She technically, to her credit, predicted the future. I suppose, in a sense, but not. I don't agree with her logic of how she got there. I don't know. All right, Sarah, anything to add to that point?
No, you basically summed up my thoughts.
Okay, and let me know like if you want to put in your notes. I'm just gonna read through my notes basically. All right. So Schmidt. And then she makes the point that Schmidt thinks unions allow the workers to dictate what people do. For example, labor prices, and therefore unions are part of the process of socialization or even socialism, because they affect society in a way. Unions in theory should be democratically elected, organizations that are um, voluntarily participated in by the proletariat, um, who motivate and do things that include workers' rights and making life better for their workers, and therefore it's a process, part of socialization, because it bears similarities. What do you think, Sarah? Do you think
I don't
unionization is part of socialism?
not. I mean, I guess, but like under a capitalist society, I don't think really it is, because like this, like I quoted this from the thing: the scope of trade unions are limited to wage and hour struggles rather than process and technicalities. Like all they can really talk about is like how much money they get, and that's kind of it.
Mhm.
And in a socialist world, that's just not how it would be.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I agree with you, Sarah. I don't think you could really call labor union socialism. Socialization, maybe.
There's like little aspects of socialism in
Yeah,
there.
it's little aspects. They're just like, it's just democracy and workers' rights, which are parts of socialism, but like, I don't know, that's a part of a lot of things, you know? Um, yeah. All right, the next point is, and then this becomes important later on, but social reforms are enacted by the capitalists who run the government, and therefore reforms can never be socialist. Which
I
is
do.
the point she makes. So Sarah, what do you think about that?
I agree. I think it. Yeah. Just yeah. At one point, she starts talking about like feudalism and how she like related that to that, because
Yes, I really like that.
I love that.
Yeah, I think that's coming up. That was towards the end of their chapter, I believe. So yeah, I would be inclined to agree. Yeah, I mean, you can't implement socialism while the capitalist class still runs the government, but that makes the assumption that they will always be in power. So can you reform into socialism, or, and this is just, an idea. I don't know if we would want to do that, but can you reform into socialism by moving more and more left wing and then taxing billionaires, I guess, out of existence? But that would still mean the capitalist class exists, but it limits their influence severely. So in theory, is it possible that you can diminish the power of the capitalist class into being non-existent and filling the government with working class people? In theory, can that be possible? Can that be reached? That depends if you get lucky and it's allowed by a
Yeah.
society run by capitalists.
Which doesn't really make sense that the capitalists would be okay with
Hmm.
ending capitalism.
Yeah,
But
because
also, I don't know if like people would even with those viewpoints would be able to like get into government positions, or at least like high up ones, because it takes so much money.
mhm.
That
But what about gradually? Like, today it starts with union advocacy, and tomorrow it starts with something more than that. And then, down the line, it becomes, all right, the means of production. Like, and then maybe, it starts with union advocacy, and then it goes to nationalization of certain industries, and then it goes to full nationalization of all industries.
I don't know. I
I
feel
don't
like
know. I think that depends on the health of the democracy, and is it a real democracy, or is it is it a rigged democracy? But this point here is, to me, the most point I'm most conflicted on, and the point that is, like, that would pull me towards revolution. I don't think any of the other points really um, that she makes really pull me in any significant way, but this, I guess, would kind of does, because it It makes sense to me.
Oh, the point we were just talking about? I thought you were leading up to another point.
Oh no, yeah. Sorry, the point that I was just talking about.
Well, then yeah, I agree. Because when I can't fathom like any person like getting into government actually, taxing the rich out of existence, I guess.
Mhm.
And I feel like it'd be one of the situations where they just get too greedy. Like they'll like tell the like public, they'll be like, this is what I'm gonna do when I get into office, and then they just don't do it because they know they'll lose money if they do. So I don't think it's possible.
And I think, frankly, this is the most important question. Because me and Vikas, go watch the debate link in the description. We had a debate on whether voting third party is something that we have to do to enact leftist values, or can we work within the confines of the Democratic Party? And in this, in this situation, revolution would be third party, and reform would be within the Democratic Party. So this kind of a topic that we debated in there, and I'd like to debate it to a greater extent, but if you would want to see my full extended opinion on sort of that topic, link in the description.
Love the plug.
Yeah, gotta make sure drive out that viewership. All right. Next, she said Schmidt believes that over time capitalists will lose their power and be diminished to rank of administrators as social change progresses. Society demands reform, which limits the power of capitalists. So that's what Schmidt believes. I still want to be inclined to believe with him, honestly. What do you think, Sarah?
I don't think it goes to that extent. Society demands all those things, but I don't think to the extent that capitalism will literally crumble.
Okay. But if I make the argument that, okay, we could say how could the peasants ever force their feudal lords to give up their land to the peasants, to allow the peasants to work the land of their own volition? How could a monarch ever give up his divine right to rule with absolute supremacy? Yeah.
I don't know.
Although, wait, no, I just realized my point just like completely counteracts my own argument.
Because a second there. Nothing. I just agree that your
Okay.
point makes sense.
Never mind. No, I just like argued my point out of existence because the monarchs were overthrown via revolution. So yeah, never mind. Forget I said that.
I'll cut it out. It's fine. Don't worry.
Well, no, keep it in. Because I mean that's a mess up by me. I'll leave it in. Because I guess it's an interesting point. But what I was trying to say is that the Enlightenment. Shoot, no, I don't really know.
Okay. Take a moment, think about it.
Okay, to an no, I don't know. I don't even know. Yeah, like to the greatest extent that you could say is that during the French Revolution, the first one, the third estate was called, and they were going through like an electoral decision where the monarch was gradually had to start giving up constitution. Like the monarch, it was the style at the time for it to be a limited constitutional monarchy where the king had some sort of constitution, and this started with the Magna Carta in Britain. The king had some sort of obligation, and there was some sort of parliamentary system, which replaced the system of courts and feudal lords, and that chain of command. But yeah, so the third etat, the third state came together with the first and second state. And if you don't know, to give you a little reminder on history, the first estate is the church, right? Yeah. First estate is the church, second estate is the nobles, and the third estate is I wouldn't say the common people. I would say more like the doctors and the lawyers and like the middle class.
I was gonna say everyone else.
Yeah, it was meant to be everything else, but they were only represented by lawyers and doctors, like people who could write and read. Yeah. So anyways, they came together, and I think King Louis was asking for a change in budget and a change in tax, because he had to ask permission to change the tax because he was like hopelessly in debt. I think that was it. I don't remember everything, but it doesn't matter really. He asked the parliament to form in order to grant him tax, and they held the vote. And the way they traditionally did it is each ita got one vote. So the church got one vote, the nobles got one vote, and the people got one vote. But as you can imagine, there with the way they divided it up, there was 200 clergy members, 200 nobles, and there were 600 people of the third ita. So obviously, as you can imagine, the first and second estates, they voted fine, they support the king, but the third estate, they didn't, and they wanted the king to give some sort of concessions before giving him this right. They wanted, more limits on the king's power, in return for allowing him to change the tax. Now they would be outvoted because each Itai got one vote. However, they were a lot more people, so they said, "Hold on, let's count the vote by person versus by estate." Yeah, so the first and second estates and the king didn't like that, obviously, because that meant that they would be giving up their power, and so the king tried to kick the third estate out until they sorted themselves out. But instead, they created they decided to say, okay, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to create a new constitution. We're going to go in this tennis court and we're going to lock ourselves in here and we're going to write a constitution, which is what they did. And obviously, the king didn't take very kindly to that. And then he eventually tried to have them arrested. And then you sparked the revolution. So I guess my whole point here is they tried to do it democratically. And then the, I guess for a metaphor, capitalist class reacted not very well to their power being taken away and instigated a fight. And then the French people obviously ended up winning that revolution. And then you had Napoleon, but
whatever.
Or was that Napoleon with the first French Revolution, or was that after a couple of them?
That was the first one.
Are you sure? Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know. It gets really foggy. The France has gone through a lot of government changes.
France has gone through so much. Poor the France.
Yeah. So, yeah, my whole point being there is that you can sort of get through electoralism, at which point the capitalist class will fight back, and then a revolution will be forced upon the people.
So let's start with reform, and if it doesn't work, let's resort to revolution.
No, let's do reform, and then when the capitalist class eventually says, okay, no more reform, we're going to start killing you now, then you have permission to fight back.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess that would be the best case scenario, using the poor point that I brought up with the monarchs, that I just dug myself into this giant hole, which I'm trying to dig myself out of, which probably took like 10 minutes.
It took a little while, but I think it works.
It's an important point, I guess. So that would be a compromise between reform and revolution. So we'll.
It's not really compromise, because revolution just ends up being the way you go. Like we tried reform, but it didn't work. That's just result now.
Yeah, but it's up to the capitalist class to decide if it will work or not.
And it's just, I don't think they're gonna.
So it wouldn't be the fault of us. Not us, but like
giving us a reason to revolt.
Yeah. All right. Actually, I lost my point in my notes. We're just about to get to the feudalism thing. Okay. All right. Cool. All right, Sarah, do you want to cover this feudalism thing? Because
I don't think I'll be able to put it into like as well of words that Rosa can.
Okay.
You can try. Or don't.
Or do you want to do it, or?
No, you just...
Okay, I'll try it. I'll attempt. So I think I'll have to cover this in a couple points, but this was a little bit confusing when I took my notes, because I took like I'll read it and then I'll stop reading and then I'll write something down and I'll read more. So I might have benefited from reading a little bit ahead and then writing my notes down, but I didn't want to forget it. So what she's saying is that feudalism is actually pretty based. But the problems with it was that the distribution of property and hierarchies, the distribution of property and the social hierarchies that ensure that distribution of property. So that was the problem with feudalism, where you have unequal hierarchies and caused by an unjust distribution of property. So those are two fundamental, I guess, Marxist kind of leftist positions where they don't like hierarchies and they don't like unequal distribution of property. So those are like two things to remember and think of, I guess. So it's just interesting that they brought up an important point, and also that she was like talking about how feudalism was actually kind of cool.
It's kind of interesting. Kind of weird. I wasn't expecting that. It was out of nowhere.
Do you want to add to that, Sarah? Or?
Really? Do you think feudalism is based now?
I don't know. I don't have enough research on the topic through that frame. Because normally I'd say no, but
yeah, that's
interesting way she phrased it. Well, this segues into our next point, which is that capitalism is actually kind of based, but because of corruption of capitalists and such things as stocks and the efficiencies of capitalism, such things as stocks, the efficiencies of capitalism have become corrupted, where the capitalists themselves do not add significant value via their labor. So to explain it in a more simple way, Elon Musk, take him for example. All right, a lot of people think he does a lot of work for his company, and he does do a lot of work, but he doesn't really design the cars. He doesn't really design the rocket ships. He doesn't really know any part of that process. He just kind of maybe directs the company in a certain like stylistic design way, but like he's not gonna be like, okay, we need to build a rocket. We're gonna put this component and this component. If you engineer it this way, we're gonna do that. No, he's just gonna say, let's build a rocket that can go to Mars. All right, get to it.
Yeah.
To his engineers, who are the people putting in the actual labor. And the reason he can do that is because he has a lot of wealth in order to just be able to own the institution and pay for the startup costs. So he doesn't do a whole lot of work besides like networking with other companies, and that's the main work really most bosses do these days. Mm-hmm. I guess, but he's not doing the labor work himself, so he doesn't really deserve the profits, I guess.
Yeah.
So is that like a understandable way of putting that, what she was kind of trying to say?
It's kind of like what she said earlier about how like you can't pay laborers the extent to what they deserve, because then the managers and the bosses don't get any money.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to touch, so it's actually not that surprising to me, and a lot of people might be surprised with the feudalism thing, but I'm maybe extra surprised about a Marxist or self-acclaimed Marxist talking about how good capitalism is. But a lot of Marxists agree with Adam Schmidt's, right? Is that the book?
Konrad.
No, the Capitalism book.
No idea.
Something Adam something
Smith.
Yeah, Adam Smith. And he wrote The Wealth of Nations. All right, yeah. So the Wealth of Nations. He wrote The Wealth of Nations. A lot of Marxists actually agreed with capitalist principles, because capitalism, you have to understand, was a system designed to come up with an alternative to feudalism, which was obviously bad, and to a lesser extent merchant capitalism, or what's the other economic system? The something merchant. Mercantilism. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So mercantilism, and which was sort of a bridging step between feudalism and capitalism. So capitalism, as an idea, is that anybody can start their own company and make their own profits, and if you put in the work, then you will be successful. That's the core idea behind it, and that is actually what Marx did is he looked at capitalism and he decided, all right, capitalism, while it promises all these great things, in practice it doesn't work out the way you think it would. On paper it's great, but when you put it in practice, and the reason why that's ironic, if you didn't understand, because that's like a criticism of communism. But
Yeah, I was
anyway.
gonna say that. Anyways, continue. I got really excited for no reason.
It's all right. So yeah, anyways, so he looks at capitalism and he says, okay, how can I design a system that actually rewards, if you put in the work, you like an actual merit-based system where you put in the work and then you get to reap your own benefits, and there's no uneven hierarchies and stuff like that. So that's what Marx did. So a lot of people will actually agree with the wealth of nations, and Adam Smith ended up also, proposing some critiques of capitalism after writing the Wealth of Nations when he looked into it a little bit more. But I will say, obviously, capitalism is much more preferable to feudalism, where at least you have a chance of being wealthy, like starting from nothing and being wealthy. At least you have a chance of social mobility. Whereas under feudalism, if you were born a peasant, you will die a peasant. Like there is like literally nothing you can do about it. You will die a peasant. You will die a peasant. There will be no change in social mobility if you are working class ever. There's no promise of it. So to a sense, and capitalism created the new nouveau riche, and they came in, and now you have these nobles who had the old money and the people who started making a lot of money off of capitalism. So I kind of derailed from my original point, so I'll stop it there.
Well, I was gonna say, like, at least capitalism now, the idea that, like, oh, if you work hard enough, you'll make it.
Mhm.
It's just not really the truth.
Yeah, and I think this is going off a little bit of a tangent here, but I think at the start of the life cycle of capitalism, it works out pretty well, where you don't have these super large mega corporations who are able to tip, capitalism is market as a fair system where the person with the best competition wins. But really, what it's become now is that the biggest company wins because they can outprice compete and price gouge and do different market tactics to where they can still make more profit and have the worst idea. Where you have, for example, drug companies, instead of making new drugs, they're just repatenting old drugs that are already making the money because they don't feel like investing in the price to research into better drugs. They're just producing the same drugs over and over again and hiking up the prices. So there's not like a whole lot of they're the same hierarchies and unequal distribution of property that you see in feudalism to a lesser extent exist under capitalism, under as the capitalism progresses and large wealthy people and wealthy companies become further and further cemented, and companies merge. Like in the 60s we had like 85 top companies, and now there's like 3 top companies competing for a certain amount of market share, I guess. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but hopefully one that you enjoyed. So Sarah, do you have anything else to add to her how base capitalism is?
No.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything else to add to chapter 3? Because that's the end of my notes for chapter 3.
Same.
Okay, cool. So chapter 3, really interesting. A lot of the not key, but like a lot of interesting criticisms and some surprising things where she's saying feudalism is kind of base, capitalism is kind of base. Something I didn't expect her to say. The union stuff, I didn't really agree with her yet. Agree with her on a lot of points, but anyways, already expressed that. So moving on to chapter 4, and Sarah has a little bit more notes on this than I do, so
I
she'll
don't
be.
know that.
Well, I only have like 6 or 7, so.
Well,
Right.
I had 5. So.
Well, I had like 20 notes for chapter 3, so.
Jeez.
All right. Anyways, what she starts off chapter 4 with, and Sarah, you can jump in at any point if you want. What she starts off chapter 4 with is that capitalism in the state work directly together to blend the state and social control And under capitalism, capitalism is able to cause problems in the social life, and the state is able to intervene and fix the problems, granting it further and further power. Therefore, as the state becomes more powerful, so does capitalism, because capitalism controls the state. So this chapter and this first point is representative of the chapter pretty well. This chapter, it talks a lot about the state and capitalism and how those two are linked or maybe not linked. And this idea is a fundamental idea to a lot of socialists, because a lot of socialists, while it's the meme that socialism is like when you have authoritarian governments. Really, what Marx and people like him set out to do was create a government that didn't control you as much as possible, with people were as free as possible. And basically what I'm trying to say is Marxists don't really like the idea of state control, which may be surprising to some of you, but that's at least what the founding ideas behind it were, and you can kind of see that bleed through in this chapter where they criticize state control a lot. All right, so to her point, I can see where she's coming from. So basically, what it's saying is that a capitalist government will create a crisis, or sorry, not the capitalist government. Capitalism will create a crisis. For example, an economic crash during the boom and bust cycle, like we discussed in the last video. They'll create that economic crash, and now the government has to implement welfare to reset the economy and keep it going, or pass out stimulus checks. And that means they have to spend, which means they have to tax more. And if they have to tax more, they have to enforce that people are taxed, which means they have to have a greater police presence. They have to have stronger laws. They have to have prisons and all that. And then now that they have these prisons and laws and police, now they can, in theory, exert more control over people, where you have a state that becomes more and more authoritarian, because it gives itself powers caused by capitalism. And Rosa kind of assumes that the people who control the government are capitalists themselves, and we can see that Trump, he had a lot of businesses. He would be a capitalist.
Definitely.
A lot of Congress members are obscenely rich. So yeah, but yeah, I'm getting lost in what I was trying to say. So Sarah, do you have anything to say on that?
I just think it's like I agree with her. I just think it's such an interesting thing that capitalism, creates problems, and then it ends up making capitalism stronger in the long run. I think it's very strange.
What makes the state stronger, and the state can do stuff. And this is ironic, because if the state does stuff, that is anti-capitalist, because capitalism is based on free market economic forces. So now you have to maybe make the distinction, or some people would argue that there is no distinction between capitalism and crony capitalism, where the state does bailouts, for example. So bailouts are anti-free market capitalism, because under free market capitalism, if a business fails, that's it. Sucks to suck. You lost. You're not getting bailed out by the governments. So the banks in 2008 wouldn't have gotten bailed out under a free market capitalist system. And then what the banks are supposed to take away from that is, next time, prepare and have some money in your pocket in case something goes wrong. And then this isn't directly correlated, but under coronavirus, then the airlines had to get bailed out because they had been engaging in stock buybacks, and they knew that they're going to get bailed out by the government, so might as well not keep a rainy day fund, I guess. So you can see how government intervention might make capitalism worse, and that's the argument of right-wing libertarians, that they might make that argument, saying control from the state makes capitalism worse. But it also, I would argue, makes it better, or not better, but it entrenches these large companies who are too big to fail, where they will always make profit because they can engage in whatever they want, and they will know that the government will bail them out. because if they fail, our entire economy just collapses.
Interesting.
All right. Next point, I guess, since I've talked about this point enough. Oh, okay. I just wrote a note saying, yeah, this is an interesting perspective and reminds us that communists do not like the state and wish for a stateless society for, wish for a stateless society. I don't know what I was trying to write there. Economics. Oh, and they oppose hierarchies because they I have no idea what I use, like when I was writing down my notes, I wrote them in my phone and I used like voice talking.
Yeah.
And I guess it like didn't recognize what I was saying. I'm trying to freaking think of it. Basically, it's just saying communists don't like the state because the state reinforces hierarchies and they don't like hierarchies that exist because they're unjust. And if they're unjust, then it's not meritocracy. And if it's not meritocracy, people can't succeed off their own free will. And then that's an antithesis to one of the founding principles of communism. And I think it's important when you look at these government policies, you have to ask why. You have to get down to the singular narrative of why people are doing things. And I guess where you can even go further. You can say Marxists want to live in a society where there's a meritocracy. Why? Because that enhances the common good, I guess, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe the common good in the best society for most people would be a society in which you don't have to do any work to succeed. You just succeed. But
Well, that
I
like
digress.
how do you define succeeding? Because in a capitalist society, succeeding is having a lot of money.
Well, like you have the ability to sustain your life. You live a happy life, and you have a family, I guess.
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Like,
How would you guys define success? That's a pretty
yeah,
loaded
I think
question.
it's like a hard word to define because like I don't know, like your thing makes sense, and then my first thought for some reason was like, what if you're born with depression? Then you can't succeed because you can't be happy. And then it's like, what if you're what's it called? What's the word? Aromantic. You don't want a relationship, so you don't have a family. So do you just not succeed?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. Yeah.
I think like people define like their own. They make their own definition for succeed.
Okay.
Everyone has.
Well, that's my
You
definition.
want a family and happiness?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let's talk about it. Why would that be my idea of success? Because that is like the white picket fence American dream of the 60s.
Yeah.
Be rich, have a home, have a family, and have barbecue and play with your dog in the yard. No. Yeah, that's kind of interesting that, and we'll discuss in history class. I'm not sure if this is what they're trying to imply, but maybe they're in history, our textbooks trying to imply that maybe this wasn't an achievable dream for a lot of people, and it was a creation by rich people or the capitalist class, I guess. It's a creation by them to motivate you into defining success that way, and it makes it so that you have to work for them and make money, I guess.
That makes sense.
Oh, so that's interesting tidbit. Discover things every day by being introspective. Be introspective. All right, let's move on to the next point. Under late-stage capitalism, the interests of the bourgeois ruling class that run the government start to collide with the economic needs of society as society demands further and further socialization to compensate for capitalist flaws. This is our next point. So what this means, for an example of in modern times, and this kind of suggests that she predicted what would happen, is that welfare. Okay, the welfare state basically subsidizes the fact that Americans aren't paid enough and don't have enough money to live on their own. So we have to have welfare where we take from the middle and to an extent the upper class. We take their money and reallocate it to the lower class who can't afford to live off of the wages that they're paid. Something I saw a statistic like most people on food stamps are Walmart employees or Giant employees or something, or one of those companies. So essentially, we are subsidizing the wages of Walmart employees by paying for food stamps and stuff like that, because Walmart doesn't pay them enough that they can live. Like they literally can't buy groceries.
Which is weirdly ironic because they work at grocery stores.
Yeah, that's sort of cruel, isn't it? Don't you think?
That's terrible.
You're like starving to death, but you're like selling groceries all day. But yeah, so basically we're paying for the flaws of capitalism. We're paying as a society, societally, we need welfare. Otherwise our economic system will collapse because no one will have any money. And if no one has any money, no one's spending anything. If no one's spending anything, supply goes up, demand goes down, and then prices go like crazy high. No one buys anything, and the cycle repeats until there's no more economy because there's no more commerce. Yeah. So what am I saying?
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, her point basically is that oh yeah, so her point basically is that for the bourgeois class, they would want not welfare because they want to make as much profit as possible, and welfare is going to have to be paid in part by them. So welfare would be the antithesis of what society needs, because society needs welfare, otherwise the economic system will collapse basically. So these things are clashing, and the capitalist class will be running the government, which is her assumption. And if the capitalist class is running the government, then the government won't be able to do what society needs, which would be further and further socialization, to compensate for capitalist flaws. So I guess what she's implying is that let's just circumvent this whole issue and get rid of the capitalism, so we don't have capitalists in power and we don't have to compensate for capitalist flaws. We just have a society, a different one, I guess.
A different one.
Yeah, so that's her implication of why we need revolution in that sense. Do you agree with that, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you don't. What's
A bit. I don't know.
what makes you hesitant to agree?
I'm just scared of revolution, so I'm like weary to like agree on her with anything.
I mean, I think you can agree with some of her points, especially like these 2 points, because I mean, or I guess this one point that I said earlier, this is like the thing that would convince me most, or that would pull me most towards revolution, because I just can't come up with an answer other than the fact that they're eventually, like Schmidt said, the capitalist class will be through social reform regulated to just an administrative class. So that would be the only way around it. Otherwise everything else would suggest revolution. But just because a revolution is oh shit. I'm trying to phrase this. Just because a revolution is necessary doesn't mean we should do it. And that sounds terrible. I don't know really how else to phrase it.
No, I mean, I get it.
I mean, you can recognize, okay, say it this way. This might be very liberal to say, but or Stockdale thing to say, but we can say, okay, right, the capitalist class will rule the government. But what if we had $25 minimum wage? That would be good enough, right? Wouldn't it? Like, is that how much can revolution really take us farther? And what are the risks involved with revolution? And what are the pains involved with going through revolution, where we can just kind of live off $25 minimum wage. So, I mean, while revolution would be technically better, there's a lot of other costs that come with it. So, maybe we just stay happy with $25 minimum wage.
Stay content.
Stay content. I feel like this is a video series that I will regret in my future. Regret making.
No, never regret.
Well, I feel like somebody's gonna watch this now in the near future, in the future, and be like, oh, well, and then they're gonna imply a lot of things. So you know what? Let me get ahead of it. Put a disclaimer. All right. This is the in context. So if this clip is not in the clip that you're watching, this is out of context. And you wouldn't even know because this clip wouldn't be in it. So whatever. I'm 17. I know nothing. And yes,
Facts.
Opinions are subject to change. And I'm dumb.
You're literal children.
But I guess the question would be, does that invalidate like literally everything we work towards because our opinions mean absolutely nothing?
We're the young voters. Woohoo! There's a reason why we can't vote yet, people.
I feel like I should not be talking because this is destroying the concept of our website existing. And I can't just sit on this fence because I have to pick one side or the other. And I won't. I refuse to. So what I will say is that we know nothing, and I'm 17, and this is like my first time reading this book, and I barely understood it. But this is what I think about now, and what will inform me in the very near future. And until things change, this is relevant.
Yeah.
Is that a good solving?
Yes, I think so.
All right. Yeah. So just because you believe something doesn't mean it has to be permanent, but you can operate off of those beliefs now.
People change.
Yes. All right. Next point. Capitalism is propelled and accelerated by war. War is it? Sorry. You want to cover this?
No, I mean a little bit.
Okay, do it.
I'm not very good at speaking, but I just really liked this because all I could think of was World War I and II, and how World War I literally created a depression, and then World War II took us out of it. It's just weird that war and killing people is just so good for capitalism and making money, and it just weirds me out. That was my take on it. Please continue.
No, that would be my take. Relevant book. If you recognize, viewers, if you recognize this book, relevant to what you just said, and relevant to modern times where we're in wars that a lot of people might say we shouldn't be in, and there might be a motive when there isn't a discernible one, and that motive might be
money. Might, because there's definitely a chance that it's not that. Yeah, definitely. Continue.
We're desperately trying to ensure that we don't get canceled for what you say, Sarah.
Definitely. Cancel culture is very prevalent right now, you guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary.
Well, I would say in the reverse sense, but like we get canceled by the right, or maybe in the future where we do have, I guess, a revolution, which I will not. Yeah.
When we have a revolution.
If we do have a revolution, we're going to be put before the Committee of Unsocialist Activities, where we said we're not sure if we should have a revolution or not, and then we're going to get executed because we didn't support the revolution.
So we're getting murdered in the future.
Yes.
Wow, that's crazy. Never thought.
If we put this video up right now, we are going to get murdered by the Committee for Unsocialist Activities.
Unsocialist.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're definitely not socialists. No.
All right, now you're just.
Just don't worry about it. Continue.
Oh my God! Should I do another disclaimer? I feel like this just extending the length of the video.
We're literal children.
Okay, yeah. Refer back to the original disclaimer. Well, actually, I'll just say this real quick. I do not consider myself to be socialist. I consider myself to be anti-capitalist.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Which, you can decide what that means. And now I just made that sound worse. All right, whatever. I'm just gonna stop talking, and we're gonna continue talking about the book because I'm just all right. So she talks about how war is propelled and accelerated by, capitalism is propelled and accelerated by war because under war leads to better profits, and is necessary to impose and maintain capitalism is what she has 3 points in there. So I would recommend you read the book for those 3 points because I didn't understand them too fully, so I didn't want to really talk about them too much. But it's a good section, so read that section. So she's saying under later stage capitalism, war is a defect of capitalism and an inherent. And she sort of predicts World War II, where she talks about there's a large buildup and there's a need for war that is building up and building up and building up. And she sort of, I'm not exactly sure when this book was written, but she did live past, or not past, but during World War One. So I don't know. Yeah, Sarah, if you look that up.
I'm Googling. Don't worry.
Okay. But she sort of predicts, if not World War One, World War Two, and to some extent Vietnam, and Iraq wars, and the other proxy wars, and the South American coups and overthrows.
So there's 2 parts. It was published in 2 different publications.
Mm-hmm.
The first was in 1898,
Mm-hmm.
and the second was in 1908. So this was before everything.
Okay, yeah, before, yeah. So she predicted it then. In that case, which does that suggest that she's right, or
just
do you think, Sarah? If she's able to predict these things, does that suggest that her ideas must necessarily be correct?
I think it's a logical fallacy, kind of. I don't think it necessarily means it's correct, but
Okay.
like someone could predict it and be just not correct at all.
I don't understand her point fully, so I'd be hesitant to say if I agree or not. So I'll just pass on that. Sarah, what do you think about this point?
I'll pass too because I don't know.
Okay. All right. Next, she says, war is only beneficial to the bourgeois and is harmful to the working class. Therefore, a government that goes to war is increasingly the government of the bourgeois. Again, this book. And this book was written by a communist or socialist. Or was he? I think he was communist. Anyways, logical consistency, and that shows why reading theory is important to understand communist points, because they are all rooted in a couple of these ideas, which I've been trying to hammer down, and they stay consistent throughout history. So yeah, that's why it's important to read theory if you consider yourself to be socialist, communist, leftist, general historian of politics, or a person who's interested in knowing what the communist socialist sort of left will do in the future. And it applies mainly to the communists and the socialists, because leftism, or progressives, I guess, as you could say, they understand the same ideas, but the solutions to these ideas are different and more watered down and less radical. So they might be a little different, but the underlying motivations are similar, I guess.
Yeah.
But you could say conservatives also have the same opinion. They want less government. They want a economic system in which you have meritocracy and stuff like that. But they just think capitalism and free market is the answer to that, where leftists might say we need socialism to answer that. Or socialists or communists would say we need socialism or communism to answer for that. Or progressives might say we need gradual reform to fix capitalism. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Good coverage. All right. All right. And 2 more points. Don't worry, guys. This video has probably gone pretty long. Definitely longer than other ones, right, Sarah?
Well, because chapter 3 was really long.
Mm-hmm.
It was just long.
And I went off into a lot of tangents, but I think that's important. When you read theory, not only can you have to understand these ideas, but you have to connect them to modern society, because a lot of this theory, some of it's not, but a lot of it might be still extremely relevant today, which is why, you know, people continue to operate off of it. And you have to relate it to the modern day, and you also have to relate it to talking points and ideas that come from the left, because like I just mentioned, these are the ideas that they're operating off of. So it's important to relate them and make them not only understandable so that people can just understand it and the ideas can spread farther, but it's also important to relate what she's saying to what's happening now so you can better understand it, because it's kind of hard to put yourself in the mindset of 1890s economics.
Mm.
But it is pretty easy to take the principles and apply them to other things. And that suggests that you really understand it. If you can take the principles that you see in here and then see how that applies to current day society or any sort of society, then you understand the fundamental point she's making versus saying, this is what the argument would have been in 1890 from a communist point of view. Does that make sense?
Facts.
Okay. All right. Last 2 points. Social democrats can progress towards a social society. However, democracy represents the interests of society. Society in a capitalist one is dominated by the bourgeois. Therefore, democracy rules in favor. Therefore, when democracy rules in favor of the working class, the bourgeois will abandon democratic principles and to counter this and keep their power. This is why communists don't believe in democracy, which is right at the end. So what that essentially means is that we through gradual reform, yes, you can go towards socialism. She's admitting that. She's saying that. She's conceding that. Which is what Schmidt operates off of. However, Schmidt believes that we live in a democracy where if the working class wants something, it's going to happen. However, Rosa thinks we live in a democracy that reflects the values of society, and we are in a capitalist society where the bourgeois hold a how should I say, not unequal, but like disproportional amount of power to, the wealth holds a disproportional amount of power compared to, how much power they should have. For example, money in politics. If you have a lot of money, you can pay and you can buy off basically politicians to support your policy, like things that would be beneficial to you. For example, oil companies, they can pay a lot so that while even though climate change reform is incredibly popular in the United States, for its citizens, oil companies are able to lobby enough to get Congress to not really do anything about it. Does that make sense, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Okay. So therefore, we don't actually live in a real democracy. And this goes back to the principle that socialists believe socialism is the ultimate achievement of democracy. So she's proposing we're not in a real democracy where the working class don't have the power, because the bourgeois hold a disproportionate amount of power and the main power in deciding policy of government, which is why communists might say, I don't believe in electoralism. It doesn't matter. None of it matters anyways. The bourgeois is just going to do what the bourgeois is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we have very little deciding power over that. An example of this, an additional example might be the continuing thing where we have to vote for the worst of both evils, where we had Hillary and Trump, and then we had Trump and Biden, where these are all like candidates that are really crap and really no one wants them to be president. Yet they always seem to be the candidates, and they're the people who are showing up, and their crappy economic policy positions that nobody likes are seem to be the ones that are existing. Legalization decriminalization of marijuana is like one of the most incredibly popular things in the United States right now. That's not getting passed. The ability for illegal immigrants who have been living in the United States for like 5 years to become naturalized. That's like 9 in 10 Americans support that, and it's not getting passed. Weed legalization is not even something that the Biden campaign ran on. Minimum wage was incredibly popular. All this stuff that is popular amongst the citizenship is not popular in Congress because their interests aren't the same as our interests because they're part of the bourgeois class, is what she's saying. So, Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
No. But I like everything you just said.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so that would be, for example, why a lot of leftists argue for getting big money out of politics, because it will limit the power for, what am I saying? It will limit the power of the bourgeois in politics to an extent. And if we see that pass, so I'll give you an example to tell if Rosa was right or wrong. If we see big money and super PACs and donations and all that stuff get written out of politics, then Schmidt was right and Rosa was wrong. Reform is possible, because that would be an example of the bourgeois giving up an essential power that they hold that allows them to determine the course of government to the working class. And as soon as we get big money out of politics, you're going to see a lot more populist positions where candidates are only beholden to their voters versus their donors, I guess. So if that happens, then Schmidt was right.
But are we just gonna wait until that happens?
Well, then in theory, if Schmidt was wrong, then you're going to wait for forever. So maybe we look at Bernie. Bernie ran on getting big money out of politics to an extent, and he was really aggressively cheated at. Yeah, I guess the evidence is there for that. I don't want to promote any conspiracy theories, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Bernie was cheated out of the 2020 Democratic primary, and the 2016 Democratic primary. He was just cheated out of it because the Democratic establishment didn't want him in power because he would do something to limit their power. So this goes back to the idea of, can we work within the Democratic Party, or do we vote third party independent? Link in bio, where I discuss this further. Yeah. All right, Sarah, anything?
No.
All right, and the last thing I wrote, and then Sarah, I'll let you say anything else you got on chapter 4. Social reform gives the government more power. As the government grows in power, the capitalist class's power does as well. So this is kind of restating what she said in chapter 3, and you'll notice a lot of restatements in this. But yeah, so if the government passes social reform saying, okay, we have now legalized whatever, or we have now illegalized whatever, then the government has more power, because if they legalize something, then they're suggesting that they have the right to take that away. And if they illegalize something, then obviously they have the power to stop that action from happening. So the government's power grows, and say, the capitalist class can say, okay, now that we're a big powerful government, you now have to buy from large corporations. You can't buy from small business anymore. I mean, this is like completely made up and doesn't make any sense, but just for the example. So if the government had enough power, they can pass, the capitalist class, it's in the capitalist class's interest to increase and funnel profits towards big business versus small business, because they would be part of big business if they were part of the capitalist class, or like the capitalist class who is in government. So yeah, that would be an example. So she's cautioning that if we do too much reform, as Schmidt wants, then we're going to give the government a ton of power, and then when so we give the government a ton of power, and then, for example, the welfare state, if the government stopped the welfare state, our economy would probably crash. So we gave them a lot of power, and it did good reforms, but now they have a lot of power. So if we ever try and threaten the capitalist class, and then the capitalist class can resort by using the government against us. So she may caution, if we try and do this gradual reform and it doesn't work, then we're really screwed, and we're never going to get out of it without revolution. And at that point, it might be too late.
Do you think it would be too late?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly government power that, for example, the Patriot Act certainly makes it, if you were to do a revolution, I'm not FBI, I'm not saying anything here. I'm not saying anything here. I'm not trying to say anything. This is just an example. the Patriot Act would make it a lot harder for some sort of insurrection to go on, because now the government can read like your messages and what you're organizing, and read messages and organizing and stuff like that. So that makes it a lot harder if you want to be anti-government. Then they know what's going on a lot easier
Like
than they did before that.
1984 type shit. Just watching you the whole time.
Well, yeah, that's what they're doing.
I mean,
that's what they have access to. So, you know, if the government for some reason thought I was a threat to the government, which I'm not, please, I'm not.
Children.
I'm totally not. Support the government. Government good.
Yay, government.
Yay, government. But if they decided I was a threat, maybe they could read all these messages and could read, you know, maybe if the Zoom wasn't recorded and published to YouTube, maybe they could go to Zoom and say, okay, we want the records of the Zoom, we want the recording. You know, they could read my text messages to other people. They could say, okay, he's clearly organizing something. All right, let's go arrest him. Where before they couldn't. So yeah. I'm not trying to say anything about this. Please don't.
We're not revolting. We are children.
We're little children.
Literal children. So. Great.
Jesus
now
Christ.
that we're gonna get arrested.
Yeah. See, this is why I'm saying, like, I feel like I'm gonna regret this at some point.
No. Regret nothing. Keep moving.
All right.
Is that it?
Yeah, yeah, I'm just gonna stop talking at that point, because at the point I've gone off in a tangent. So Sarah, do you have anything to add to chapter 4?
No.
No? Nothing?
No.
Anything you found interesting? Anything you agreed with?
I loved the war thing. 100%. I agree with that. That's like it, I guess. I don't know. It was a really short chapter.
And I guess what motivated you to agree with the war thing? Like, what examples did you see in your own life?
My own life, I don't know. But like I said earlier,
like, why did that make sense to you?
Because of just World War II and how it literally brought the U.S. out of the Great Depression. It's just, and also, like, you brought up like wars that are happening today and how they're all just because of economics and oil and everything. Just like the whole point of war right now is,
or maybe they're continued.
Yeah, maybe they didn't start that way necessarily.
Yeah, like, you know, there's a complete chance that we went into Afghanistan with completely noble intentions, but why are we still here at that point now? And I mean, Afghanistan isn't of such vital economic resources, but Iraq was. And, you know, it's not really been proven, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there wasn't a real justification for going in. And the fact that we're still there seems sort of weird.
It's a little shitty, not gonna lie.
20 years later. So with that, I'm now on a watch list.
Yay! Now we are never getting into college.
Yeah, never getting into college. I can't join the Navy anymore, so that's just gone.
Sucks to suck, dude.
Yep. All right. Well, please, if you're from the government and you're watching this, I'm literally 17. I don't know. I can't. Yeah, I'm trying to express how. I'm trying to express in the like most simple way that I'm only trying to analyze what she is thinking, and none of the statements reflect my beliefs unless I say this is my belief. And then even if I do say it's my belief, I'm literally 17. But yeah, this feels a bit weird to include. I think I'm gonna stop talking.
I think that's, yeah, good choice.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. So Sarah, the question is, reform or revolution?
Reform, but revolution's getting a little tempting, not gonna lie.
Yeah, she started making a lot of good points.
We're getting arrested. Cool.
Oh Jesus. Myself, I would also say reform. More interesting points in the last chapter though. I enjoyed these two chapters more than the other two. A lot of these, this kind of exposes her framing and the logic behind a lot of these things, which I might not necessarily agree with. Which is where at the other two chapters, she didn't say a whole lot enough for me to disagree with. Where I was just thinking reform because that was like my opinion that I started with. But in these chapters, I actually started to think reform more because of what she's saying.
Interesting. I don't
Like
think
she'll talk about what Schmidt says, and then I'll be like, yeah, I don't know, that's pretty based. And then she'll talk about what she says. I'm like, I don't know about that.
Interesting.
For certain points, and from other points, the other way. So I think it kind of evens out.
Yeah.
Or probably more on Schmidt's side. I think I'm more on Revolution's side now, which is funny. And I'm not just saying that so I don't get arrested, to be clear.
Because we're getting arrested no matter what.
Yeah, we're getting arrested no matter what. That is my genuine belief. Reform is starting to look more sexy, although it hinges on a lot of the fact that the capitalist class will give up their power. So
yeah.
a lot more is hinging on that. But I watch, okay, government officials, watch my debate with Vikas where I like argue for the status quo like so hard, okay? You're gonna love that, all right? Just watch that. And viewers, you watch that too.
Yeah,
because I say something a little different than what I'm saying here. So okay. All right. Thank you, young voters, for watching. Thank you for suffering through however long that video is. Probably pretty long, probably our longest video from this series yet. So thank you. Sarah, anything to add?
Bye guys, love you.